Folks, I want to talk about Israel this morning, and I want to dig a little bit deeper than we sometimes dig, because my concern is that when we talk about Israel, we talk from whatever silo we're in. So we either say we need to talk about the current government of Israel and the problematic nature of some of its members, and we need to protest. Or we say we need to support Israel no matter what. We don't have any right to say anything if we're not living there. And we kind of make each other feel bad across whatever divide. So from one side, we say, what, you don't care about Israel? How dare you criticize? And from the other side, we say, what, you don't care about democracy? How come you're sitting quietly when things are happening there that are problematic? So I want to dig deeper because our community deserves that. And because we are reading and we are conversing and we are seeing what's going on, and it's important for us to be able to reflect deeply on our strong connection to Israel and what that means right now. And to dig deeply, I want to ask two questions. What happens when we don't have power? And what happens when we do have power? When we don't have power, we know that the outcome can be disastrous. Our ancestors in Egypt knew what it meant to wake up each day and to not have agency over their own lives. They were working to build something for someone else, and they lived completely vulnerable to the whims of those who had power. But not having power can also be easier. Sometimes there are fewer moral issues that come up when you don't have power, fewer decisions to be made. Having power is a gift, but it also confers responsibility. When our ancestors left Egypt, that's when they started to conceive of what it would mean to have power, what it would mean for them to have power over their own lives, and they were about to create societies where they would have power over other people. And they are given a blueprint of what it means to create a society that protects you, but also protects other people, people who might be vulnerable compared to you. The children of Israel who left that generation, they were not the ones who were going to build the new lands, but they were being given the blueprint, and their children will build that land. So that was thousands of years ago. Now I'm going to take us back decades. The following paragraph appeared in Israel's Declaration of Independence. The modern state of Israel was founded as a place which would be a homeland for Jews, but also a place where the rights of all people would be guaranteed. And here is what is written in that declaration. The state of Israel will be open for Jewish immigration and for the ingathering of the exiles. It will foster the development of the country for the benefit of all its inhabitants. It will be based on freedom, justice, and peace, as envisioned by the prophets of Israel. It will ensure complete equality of social and political rights to all its inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race, or sex. Israel's Declaration of Independence. Folks, a few weeks ago, I attended a national AIPAC conference in Washington, D.C. AIPAC is committed to preserving the Israel-United States relationship, regardless of who the government is in Israel, regardless of who the government is in the United States. AIPAC prides itself on having successfully defended the relationship between the United States of Israel and successfully defended providing for Israel's basic needs, whether there's a right-leaning government or a left-leaning government in the United States, whether there's a right-leaning government or a left-leaning government in the state of Israel. Right now, you know, because you're reading the news, Israel's majority government is actually one of the most, if not the most, right-leaning in Israel's history. And those who are in the position of leadership within the coalition are further to the right than Benjamin Netanyahu himself. And it's just important to note that there are some individuals currently in the Israeli government who have positions of power who until recently were considered to be on the fringe. So just one example, Itamar Ben-Gvir is currently the Minister of National Security. Until recently, he had in his living room a picture of Baruch Goldstein, considered himself to be a disciple of Meir Kahane. Baruch Goldstein, you may recall, in 1994, entered into a mosque, opened fire, and shot at people, killing 29 and wounding 125. Now, that should be something which is condemned. The religion of the person entering into a holy space, irrelevant. The religion of the people praying in that holy space, irrelevant. That was horrific. What happened a few days ago in Israel is also horrific. The majority members of the coalition have proposed certain things. Again, it's just important for us to know. Restricting LGBT rights and women's rights, amending the law of return to make it more restrictive, reducing the access of non-Orthodox groups to pray as groups at the Kotel, restricting the rights of Palestinians and moving further away from negotiations. There have been protests as a result. What I'm going to say in a few moments is that Israel is a democracy, a thriving democracy. You are allowed to protest, and people are protesting. And so here's what I learned at the AIPAC conference, and I want to share it with all of us because, again, we deserve to have a full sense of what's going on. At the AIPAC session that I attended, that was given by Natan Sachs, who is the director of the Center for Middle East Policy. He gave an analysis which is really interesting. So Benjamin Netanyahu, prime minister, is universally acknowledged looking to get himself out of certain legal troubles. Once he gets what he needs, according to this analyst, he's going to have very little use for some of the very far right-leaning coalition partners that he has. Israel is a democracy. And Israel has a government, and governments come and governments go. Second thing he said, which I thought was fascinating and I want to share with you. Right now, Netanyahu is beholden to the far right, but do you know who he checks in with? His center-right base. He checks in with them to see whether what is going on is okay with them or not okay with them. So you may find this interesting. His base, which is center-right, not far-right, they push back on attacks against LGBT people and women. They certainly pushed back when another far-right leader tried to shut down soccer games on Shabbat. So basically what they were saying was let people be who they are and let them play soccer on Shabbat if they want to play soccer on Shabbat. Where they're not pushing back is toward more restrictive approaches to Palestinians and the pulling back from negotiations with Palestinians. So Netanyahu is looking at them and he is navigating and he is trying to figure out where is he going to push back and what is he going to allow to happen. Now, what does this mean for us? First of all, we need to applaud and celebrate that Israel is a democracy. You may like the people elected, you may not like the people elected, just as here in the United States. But this power transfer took place peacefully. And ministers who were leaving handed the keys to their offices to ministers who were coming in peacefully, whether they like them or not, whether they agree with them or not. Second, democracy means that you're allowed to protest, and there have been huge protests. And the protesters, if you want to compare to another Middle Eastern country, a few countries to the east, are not being locked up. They're certainly not being executed. People are allowed to protest in Israel because Israel is a thriving democracy. Democracy is messy. Israel doesn't have a constitution, which means that the balance of powers is more complicated in Israel than it might be in countries that do have constitutions, though God knows it's complicated enough if you do have a constitution. Are we allowed to criticize Israel here in the United States? Here is my opinion. I think we are, but I think we have to be careful. It is different from living in Medinat Yisrael as a citizen, but we also have a stake. We have a stake in what goes on in Israel. However, we need to be careful how we criticize. Why? If we criticize, it's family criticizing family. But the people who are listening are not family necessarily, and they are not friends necessarily, and sometimes they will use our criticism, if we voice it in certain places, as an excuse to continue to demonize and to delegitimize Israel. So we have to use common sense, seichel, about what we say, how we say it, and where we say it. I want to just conclude with an interesting quotation. I believe you'll find it interesting, and then with what this means about power. So W.E.B. Du Bois, first Black man to receive a doctorate from Harvard University, he wrote and he thought about how to transform the Black community from an enslaved community to a community which would have authority over itself and presumably over other people. Here's what he wrote in 1903 at the age of 35. Honest and earnest criticism from those whose interests are most nearly touched, criticism of writers by readers, of government by those governed, of leaders by those led. This is the soul of democracy and the safeguard of modern society. Worth thinking about. So back to the issue of power. The people who leave Mitzrayim thousands of years ago, they are going to figure out how to use their newfound power. They are going to form a society that protects the people who have land and the people who don't. They are going to make a society that preserves the rights of people who are partnered and people who are widowed and people who are orphaned. That is what is extraordinary about what our ancestors did. God willing, the Jewish people will never, ever have to go back to the powerlessness that we had before Israel was founded as a nation. We must never forget that. We just commemorated Holocaust Remembrance Day. We know that we have lived in places where our failure to have sufficient power has been devastating and deadly. Israel's existence doesn't just provide support for Jews living there, it provides support for Jews living everywhere. And I say, God bless the people of Israel who are struggling over how to use their power, how to protect themselves, and how also to protect the needs of those who are most vulnerable. So here is the full conclusion to my comments for this morning. First of all, read. Read things that you agree with, read things that you're not sure if you agree with. Don't just believe what somebody said to you here or there. You have a responsibility as a concerned member of the Jewish people, a concerned person who is connected to Jewish people, to understand as deeply as possible what's going on. I have a colleague who determined that right now, with the current Israeli government, he doesn't feel in good conscience that he could recite the prayer for Medinat Yisrael because it upholds the government. I respect him. I disagree vociferously, completely with that position. Israel always needs our prayers. I don't take prayer literally. I understand prayer as an opening for our hearts and our souls and our support. We have to pray for Israel's leaders. We have to pray for Israel's inhabitants, all of her inhabitants. We have to pan the camera back and understand what is at stake here. The need for Israel to be strong for her sake and for the sake of others. We will continue to make ourselves as knowledgeable and informed as possible. We will continue to speak out when we need to in ways that are careful in terms of wording and context. We will continue to be loving supporters and partners, which includes a constant connection to Medinat Yisrael. And I'm going to let Isaiah have the last word. Lema'an Sion lo echesheh. Ad yetzecha noga tzidka v'yeshuata kalapid yifar. For the sake of Zion, I will not be silent. For the sake of Jerusalem, I will not be still until her righteousness emerges resplendent, until her triumph burns like a flaming torch. Shabbat shalom.